Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to the Pure Digital Passion podcast with Moses Kamibaro. And I'm so glad to have with me today my first ever guest from Ethiopia, the great land of Addis Ababa, with lots of beautiful women, amazing coffee. And for my last trip, as I recall, one of the coldest places I've been to in Africa. With me today is Addis Alemayehou, the chairman of Ethiopia's Kazana Group, who I got to meet over the weekend, and we had a wonderful conversation. Said, hey, why don't we just have a podcast? Karibu sana, Addis.
Thank you, Mo, for having me, man.
So, Addis, man, your CV, your credentials, you and I met on LinkedIn recently. It was an amazing sort of back and forth within a couple of days. You're here in Nairobi today. I managed to wrangle this podcast session with you, and thank you so much for making the time to be here with us today.
No, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
So, Addis, I'm not going to mention the quirky detail yet, but maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your professional and personal background and how you got here to be the chairman of Kazana Group, which is a very diverse business.
I was born and raised until I was about 8 in Addis. And then my family moved out to Nairobi, my dad, when I was about 8 and 9 years old. I grew up here in Nairobi during the same time you did.
Yeah.
So, we talked about some.
And those the same people, exactly.
For me, it was the best time, the best place to be at. And everything I've done post my residence here has been, I always give kudos to my upbringing here in Nairobi. And then later on, we moved to the U.S. and then Canada. So I was in Canada for about 13 years. And then I moved back to Ethiopia about 21 years ago.
So that's a fairly long time that you've been back in Ethiopia.
Exactly.
So tell us a little bit more about this business. I mean, how did it start, Kazana Group? And I went on your website and we talked about it on Saturday when we met. And it just seems like this sprawling, massive group with a lot of interest in different areas. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how it started and, more importantly, where you've come from and where it is today.
So, Kazana as a group started about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
So, I myself individually was investing in a lot of startups.
Okay.
In Ethiopia and the region. We realized that unless we put a structure around, the investments, it would be hard to sort of manage and the growth as well. So, in that regard, we decided to form a group, and I wanted to give back to my Kenyan roots and I'm bringing here, so hence the name Kazana.
Maybe you can explain to the guys on the who listening to this, what Kazana means in Kiswahili and sort of the very coolness behind that name.
For me, Kazana is basically never give up, always keep going. Life is always going to throw different wrenches at you, so you always have to persevere and keep going. So the essence of what we do is Kazana is basically working with young startups, kids with ideas. Funding them and helping them and supporting them, mentoring them to grow. So for me, it's essentially that's what we're all about.
So maybe let's take a few steps back before Kazana. You did mention something to me earlier about some early investments and possibly the journey maybe from Canada to Ethiopia. Where did that start from? Is there a specific line of schooling you went into? Did that take you into a particular career path? And then how did that segue into Ethiopia?
For me, it's a blessing. I believe everybody has their own natural sort of ability that is a God-given talent. It could be music, it could be art, it could be math, it could be anything. For me, it's always been ideas. I always have ideas. So whenever people are talking about problems, I'm looking at the solution.
Okay.
Right. So, and as a businessman and entrepreneur, that's the first thing. And the second thing is, having the ability to get along with people and walk into any room and make people feel comfortable around you. And that's also something that, I believe growing up in different parts of the world, you naturally have to sort of develop, right? So when I first moved back to this part of the world, I actually wanted to move back to Nairobi.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And I did. And it was hard to sort of come into this place as a foreigner, getting a foreign investment license, and also the competitive environment is a little higher. And this was about, early 2000s, late 1988 and 89 when I started sort of traveling back and forth. And Kenya and Nairobi was a different place then.
Okay.
It's a little rougher. The business environment was a little complicated,
Okay.
to say the least. So I decided to move back to Ethiopia where I could just, sort of try to see if I could plug and play. And I've made the trip back and forth. So I'm here like literally every 3 weeks.
In Nairobi from
Addis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I actually have a place here. So when I come, I just come here with my laptop bag. In fact, I had to tell everybody that I know in Nairobi, don't ever scream at me for not calling you when I'm here. Just assume that I live here, kind of thing.
Yeah. So again, going back to the sort of the genesis pre-Kazana, where does it start? Where does Addis begin? In terms of this sort of growth and progression to where you are today.
So I mean, my first gig, if I may call it, in Ethiopia was working for USAID.
Okay.
Running a program called the Vega Go Plus program, which is essentially helping Ethiopian exporters find market in the US for their products.
Okay.
And this was probably, I started this in 2003, 2004.
Okay.
And that gave me insight into how the country works. It gave me an opportunity to meet the right people, both in government and the private sector. But it also, more importantly, gave me insight into how the country works, what challenges the private sector, faces on a regular basis, and also to meet and greet and be able to sort of understand and network with key government folks.
Okay.
In terms of the people that
the relationships,
and that matters regardless of where you are, what you're doing. So I did that for about 4.5, 5 years, and then in the middle of that, I've always been interested in media.
Okay.
But particularly in Addis, when I was driving around, I used to have the old original iPod Shuffle.
Ah, yes.
Plugged into the car, into my dad's car actually, and I'd drive around, and I didn't care for any radio or any media in the car, since I had that. But when I lost the iPod, I turned the radio on, I didn't find anything that related to me and that talked to me. And I did a bit of research, and Addis being the capital city of Africa because of the AU and all of that, I realized there's a lot of people that speak English, understand English, but don't have anything that relates to them in terms of media in the country.
So was it like there was no English media, radio, TV?
And this is pre-podcast. This is pre-Facebook,
as in zero, not an English
zero. So literally,
wow.
If the city burned down and you didn't speak Amharic, you're literally gonna die because nobody told you to leave the country, right? So, and that's when the original idea for the radio station came. And then I came out here. My family and myself knew Chris Kirubi, the late Chris. And I went to see him at his office, and I basically, asked him if I could get introduced to the Capital FM people, and he made a phone call, and I spent a couple of days at Capital. I think that time, it was a guy called Titus or someone. I was managing the Capital FM.
So that gave you a sense of the sort of the inner workings, how they...
Exactly. I'm just, I just wanted to see how a radio station works and what it takes to get it up and running. And then after that, I went back home and started the process. It took about 8 years.
What? Licensing?
Yeah.
So it took 8 years from inception of idea to actually rolling out?
Yeah, literally.
Wow.
And we switched it on, I think, probably, 2010, no, maybe 2008, 2007, somewhere around there. And, after that, I started a communications group called 251 Communications. Again, just because out of the necessity of starting an advertising agency. When I had the media, I had the radio station, I needed to understand.
Oh, okay.
So I realized there was room for one more advertising agency. And again, I came out here, found someone that was in the industry to come home for a couple of months to help me set it up. The same thing I did with Afro FM.
Okay.
Actually borrowed someone from Capital.
Really nice.
To launch it. And then we started 251, which is now 10 years old.
Okay.
Doing some amazing work for a lot of clients. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, again, I had the itch for something else, and this was TV.
Okay.
And I realized at that time, so I sort of, this is the way I try to explain Ethiopia vis-a-vis Kenya. And for me, it's sort of like, Ethiopia is like watching a movie again.
I see what you mean.
I've already seen the movie here.
In Kenya.
In Kenya. Yeah. So think of Ethiopia when I was, 10 years ago as, the one we grew up in Kenya.
Yes.
Just KCB, You know what I mean? This Is It was the only music channel that, you'd wait all week to listen to. I think it was on a Friday. You know, the Team B, the show that, we waited for every 2 weeks or every week to watch,
Yeah.
You didn't have that many FM stations. Media was fairly closed at that time. Banking was, very tight. Forex was an issue. So all of those things that Kenya went through in the late 80s, early 90s, Ethiopia is currently going through, right? So if you know what's about to happen, it's easier to sort of plan and strategize, as it were, which space you want to be in, right?
So basically that proximity to Kenya, being able to see how, the progression is happening around certain industries or sectors, and then you overlay that into Ethiopia, then gives you that opportunity to do the same.
Exactly.
Awesome.
So, it's a strategy that's worked for me, and I'm very open about it. I mean, if you follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever, I'm always following up on what's going on in Kenya, and I'm always, encouraging Ethiopians to come out here and check it out before doing anything. So, you see a huge number of Ethiopians now coming back to Nairobi to check it out before they, launch a business or whatever. About 5 years ago, I had this idea it was cooking in my head for about 10 years, but eventually I decided to make a move. The original idea was to do MTV Africa.
Okay.
But the Ethiopian version. So I figured, 110 million people, average age is 18. It's a nice niche market for a music channel.
Okay.
That specifically spoke to this generation in this country.
Uh-huh.
So I went down to MTV head office in Joburg, the head office for Africa, and I spoke to the MD, and he basically convinced me that the numbers just did not make sense in terms of their licensing costs, the production costs, and all of that. So he encouraged me to do my own brand.
Okay.
And I sat with my first partner, my co-founder. His name is Elias, and I talked to him, and he wanted to do some research behind it. And at that time, we only had 2 TV stations for a country of 120 million people. So
wow.
I was like, dude, man, there's no research needed. This is simple.
It's obvious there's a gap here.
Yeah, but he's a Harvard boy, so he wanted to tick all the dots. And sure enough, about 6 months later or 3 months later, he came back and said, man, this is a great idea. Let's go for it. We found some partners out of Dubai called Mobi Group.
Okay.
So our niche was, we knew that production was going to be expensive. TV production, doing movies and sitcoms, whatnot, would be overly expensive. So what we went to the dubbing side. So we dubbed Turkish and Indian soap operas in Amharic.
Wow. So you had to do that in-house, in-market, take the content and then...
So we built a whole dubbing sort of infrastructure, which our partners, Mobi Group, helped us with, because they had the same thing in about 6 markets.
Okay.
So that's what we did. And it became probably like the top, it was the 3rd TV station, and probably got like 35-40% of market share within a couple of weeks,
Wow. And then beyond that, what's been happening? Because when I look at what you have as a group today, there's so many pieces to it, I think.
Yeah, so about 2 years ago, we sold our interest in the TV station to Canal Plus, the French group.
The French group, yeah.
Yeah, so when they came in, they needed the infrastructure, they needed the dubbing infrastructure to be able to introduce their content.
Okay.
And, we happened to be the right partner for that. So when that happened, I realized, okay, I need to move on to doing something else, and that's when I decided to get into investing in startups.
Okay. So this is now really the beginning of sort of this technology, sort of moving towards technology, as it were, in terms of business opportunities per se.
Yeah, for me, it's always looking for the next opportunity, and I figure, at this age, I'm too tired and too old to, start my own thing and be the CEO. I don't want to be a CEO anymore, so I figure that the next best thing is finding young talent and energy and ideas to invest in.
So tell me a little bit more specifically about the technology space and what you're doing there right now, both in Ethiopia and also in Kenya.
There's a lot of new innovation happening, and some of it is redundant. Some of it is something that's worked in West Africa that's coming to East. So you see a lot of similar sort of ideas being implemented. But the great thing about in a country like Ethiopia, where you have 120 million people, you have substantial sort of population to actually scale significantly without moving to other markets. So if I launch something in Kenya, I would have to go to Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and squeeze that together to be one Ethiopia, right?
Yes, exactly.
Where in Ethiopia you have enough of a scalable population to be able to be a significant player in Ethiopia, which is more than enough. So a lot of the ideas are basically ideas that have worked somewhere else, but are localized for the local reality, right? So we have a B2B called Jimla, which, something similar to what Twiga or Market Force is doing here currently.
Around supply chain and that sort of thing.
B2B supply chain, basically, the little dukas on the ground that, that are around in every corner, all over the continent. They're literally the neighborhood supermarket.
Okay.
They order products on a regular basis, so it's essentially making life easier for them by giving them the opportunity to order what they need when they need at a price that's bearable.
Okay, nice.
So that's one of the services. In Nairobi, we're busy launching a service called Mafuta.
Which means oil.
Which means gas, oil.
Yeah.
And that came about from my own personal problem where I was in Mombasa trying to get an Uber ride to the airport, and I had 3 drivers cancel on me.
Wow.
And I realized a lot of the drivers don't like the card payment service. They would rather have cash because they don't have cash on them to buy gas that day. So we started a service whereby they can get cash on credit vis-a-vis, their invoice coming in from the right companies.
Oh.
So that's something we're about to launch. We just have about 1,000 drivers on board right now and a few gas stations. So we're basically testing it on the ground.
So basically, you provide the linkage between the petrol stations, the drivers, and then you're providing the financial piece.
Exactly.
And you actually underwrite the cost yourselves.
Exactly.
Is this already operating, or is it about to start?
It's on the ground now. We're active with about 1,000 drivers, testing the system and testing the back end stuff. The app is already up and done. And the great thing is the service is being provided here. The app was developed in Nairobi. The staff is Kenyan, so this is like a crossover sort of production that's going on.
Okay, so the moment those are the 2 primary businesses that you're sort of within the tech space.
Oh no! We have SmilePay, which is a remit to utility payment, and this is for Africa. So we're launching that next month.
Okay.
In fact, I was in Paris 2 weeks ago because the group made the finals of the Orange sort of innovation competition. So
nice.
We were at Vivid Tech, which is one of the biggest European sort of tech events.
Okay.
With SmilePay, and essentially it's basically giving control for diaspora Africans to be able to pay utilities directly from their cards from where they are.
For their families.
So rather than sending $200 every month, if you pay the water bill, the electric bill, the school fees, and the phone bill, nobody can ask you for anything else, right? So that gives the control to the remitter rather than control to the family on the ground.
Because historically we know how this story goes, right? People have so-called, in quotes, built houses only to fly back and find there's a barren piece of land because the money got eaten. So it's just solving a problem around transparency and peace of mind, I suppose,
Yeah, so I mean, if you live on the other side, and for us Ethiopians specifically, there's probably about 4 or 5 million of us outside. And we're a first generation, immigrant community, so we're still very much attached to our families back home. So, you have to be able to support your family back home. And a lot of it is, the money goes towards, these things that I just mentioned, paying the basics. Things. So if you're able to pay the basics directly from an app, from where you're sitting, then, you can sort your family out on a monthly basis.
So tell us a little bit more about what's brought you on this trip. I know you've talked about Mafuta, but there's something interesting you mentioned that's also happening with Strathmore University. Yeah,
so about 2 years ago, I've always followed Strathmore, only because I went to St. Mary's down the street. St. Austin's down the street, and so the Strathmore High School. Remember back in the day, they were the geeks with the glasses. I think every single student at Strathmore had glasses on.
Those sharp boys, huh?
Exactly. Those kids were like, we were busy kicking the ball around. They were sitting under a tree reading. I always remember that. I mean, Strathmore College, Strathmore High School was like so tough kids when it came to the books. But I've always followed Strathmore Business School and University, and there's one thing that I realized is that a lot of the C-level executives in Kenya and CEO level have somehow gone through Strathmore in one way or form.
Okay.
So I wanted to bring that sort of experience of high-level education, especially for the executives, C-class executives, to Ethiopia. Given that we're about to open up our different sectors. We just opened up our telecom sector. We're about to open up our banking sector. So
yes,
I feel a bit of skills upgrading is needed. And rather than trying to bring, school from abroad, from the West, which I don't think would understand the realities that we face on the ground here on the continent, especially in the region, I think Strathmore would be, for me, ideally the perfect sort of partnership. So we started talking to them about 2 years ago.
Okay.
About an MOU where we could leverage their resources to provide, curriculum tailored for the Ethiopian market. And we're finally signing that contract tomorrow.
Does that mean they're linking up with another university in Addis? Or
no, we are going to be.
Oh, you're going to establish, okay.
So we are going to be. So we've established an entity called Capital Business School.
Okay.
In Ethiopia. So it's essentially an MOU between Capital Business School and Strathmore Business School to offer curriculum for Ethiopian executives.
Wow, fantastic.
Thank you.
So that's you in essentially the education space now.
Yeah, it is. But, like I said, man, every business that I get into comes from a problem that I face. We run several firms on the ground in Ethiopia, as well as, we have friends and networks that do the same thing. And one of the key issues we have is skills, upgrading skills. It's not like going back to college, but just those niche skills that we feel is needed on the ground in Ethiopia. So if I could be able to do that with an entity that's already doing it for a vast number of corporate clients here in Kenya, it's a slam dunk.
Great. So let's talk about something that I think had to be one of the big topics on this conversation, and that has to be Safaricom Ethiopia. Yeah. You also mentioned earlier that telecom is opening up, banking is going to open up. Safaricom, were able to win the license to operate there, and I believe they will be in market operating very soon. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are around that development, because until now, I think many of us have seen Ethiopia historically being quite closed, quite insular. Now you have this, very successful Kenyan telco coming in. Hopefully bringing in some new practices and injecting something new in the market. But I'm just curious what your thoughts are, what you're seeing there, and more importantly, what sort of what could be the implications of Safaricom coming in.
I mean, this has been, I don't know if I mentioned, but when I moved to Ethiopia, I had an MOU with Vodacom in 1998.
Oh, no way.
Yep, went down to Midrand in South Africa, signed an MOU with Vodacom to bring them to Ethiopia. So I was a young, sort of arrogant diaspora kid that thought I could come back and
launch a telco,
become a multimillionaire and launch a telecom and retire. I would have been retired by 10 years ago. But that never happened. And Ethiopia is, tries your patience. So I've been patient. It's been 21 years. We finally have a new operator in house. And in terms of the changes, I mean, we're already seeing it on the ground before even Safaricom launches, because the incumbent has 10 times better service and products than they did 3 years ago.
Oh, really? They've been working on their propositions.
There's nothing like competition to wake you up. And we're feeling it already. The consumer is feeling the difference. The consumer is feeling the price, drop and the service getting better. So you're already seeing that before the launch of Safaricom. And I believe, if anything, for any sector you're in, I don't care if you're a student, I don't care if you're a business person or whatever, having an alternative telecom service is always a good thing, right? It gives, last year we had COVID and the year before, and everybody had to sit at home, and, it was hard to get on Zoom calls and across the ocean and deal with, your business partners because, the issues around the infrastructure. So the fact that we have a second operator coming in that's going to compete and that's going to roll out its own infrastructure gives us, options.
So maybe let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, this whole COVID period, pandemic, almost 2.5 years later, did you see, as many other markets saw, this digital transformation moment where suddenly everyone was just plugged in and infrastructure had to improve? What were the implications of the pandemic from a digital standpoint in Ethiopia?
Now, one, I mean, it got people online. All our ministers had to get online and do Zoom calls like everybody else. right? They had to get on social media and be able to, articulate their vision and their plan. So for us, it was the first sort of wave of, especially Ethiopian executives, finally embracing technology because they had to, right? Whereas before you had to knock on the door and wait outside till the secretary let you in to sit down and speak to the person. Now they had to get online. So it was a huge sort of difference in attitude and in terms of embracing technology, and that, you can never go back from that.
Okay.
So you're just building it on it now.
So one thing I don't really know too much about Ethiopia is I'd like to get a sense of maybe other aspects of the digital ecosystem, like things like mobile money, e-commerce, food delivery services. What's that looking like on the ground? The Uber, taxi type services. What's happening in that area in Ethiopia at this point?
I'm only going to tell you this if you don't tell anybody. I don't want the whole world coming to Ethiopia and waking up. No, I mean, Ethiopia's got its own ecosystem that the world doesn't know about, and which is fine for us.
Really?
Yeah, which is fine for us because we're building it, before somebody else comes and grabs it. Whereas in Kenya, you guys opened up too fast, so you're competing with everybody else. With us, we're competing with each other. And the biggest challenge in Ethiopia, I think, I don't think it's the infrastructure was, yes, but that's catching up. I think it was government waking up to the fact that technology is here and it's going to be, a major sort of part of the economy. When you have an average age population of 18 years old, you literally need to wake up to the fact that these kids are not going to go read the newspaper or watch TV to get information, right? So we have our own version of Uber. We have several of them. And the biggest one is called Ride. I think they have over 40,000 drivers in the city. Does over $1 billion in revenue. And
what's that in dollars roughly?
It's about $10 million.
Annual?
Yeah.
Wow.
And is owned by a woman that is local. The local young lady that went to a local university, studied IT, and started this. And we have other, express services, Asia Express. We have Deliver Addis. We have Tukus. There's a ton of food deliveries and e-commerce sites. In fact, the vast majority of our e-commerce happens on Telegram, which is the biggest sort of social media in Ethiopia. So you can literally order anything on Telegram and have it delivered to you.
Is it like chatbot type interactions?
Yeah.
So you guys are way ahead in terms of conversational commerce.
Yeah. So, I have friends who just had a baby 6 months ago. He's never gone out to buy anything for that baby. He orders everything on Telegram and it's delivered to his door. So, it works.
And what about mobile money? What's the situation there?
Mobile money, we just launched. It's been around, but Ethio Telecom, the incumbent, just launched it about 9 months ago.
Okay.
They already have, I think, 14 million people signed up on it. 14 million people signed up on it. They're giving incentives to use, the mobile it's called Telebir, the Telebir version, to sort of, exchange money and buy airtime and so forth. So it's getting people on board. And now it's getting to the point where people are saying, instead of send me some Telebir.
So it's like sort of a cultural shift.
It's a slow, but it's coming along. But there's pockets of areas in Ethiopia where that's been happening for a long time. One is on the border areas with Kenya. And so if you go to Moyale, everybody uses M-Pesa already. And if you go to the Somali region of Kenya, they're already okay with using it and definitely use mobile money as well. So now it's coming to the mainstream. But I feel within the next couple of years, probably be bigger than Kenya.
Obviously, sheer numbers. And then, of course, Safaricom, the big daddy of mobile money, is coming into the market. So chances are, when you bring those two elements together, it's going to really go mainstream. Beyond that,
it's an exciting time. Imagine being, active, knowing what you know in Kenya 25 years ago, where mobile money was just about to start, where the banking services were about to be opened up, where media was about to be opened up, and digital services were about to come in. It's a really, really exciting time.
So here's the thing, right? Everyone, I think, is kind of scrambling to kind of get into Ethiopia, right? I think it's the second most populated country in Africa after Nigeria, which I think is about 160 million. And I'm just curious because, you have this wonderful experience of, having grown up here, close proximity to Kenya. You understand the market, you understand Ethiopia. when you look at the two, are there any things that you think are interesting? I mean, you've mentioned obviously it feels like it's a few years behind Kenya in some ways, but what do you see in terms of when you juxtapose the two? What are things that you find interesting about Ethiopia versus Kenya, and other things that are quite different, other things that are quite similar? I don't know whether you have any thoughts around that, given that you have these unique perspectives, which I think are not quite common.
For me, it's I see myself at home in both places, right? I'm at home in Nairobi as much as I'm at home in Addis. And interestingly enough, and it's the same for the average Kenyan, because we have a ton of Kenyans in Ethiopia that just walk in. It's one place you don't need a visa. You walk right in, and you feel at home because people welcome you. For us, from everywhere else in the world, I think the Kenyans are the closest in terms of relationships, in terms of feeling comfortable with. That's one. Two, I mean, there's areas that we're ahead. So if you look at our airline, which is essentially
Ethiopian,
it's like 20 times what the Kenya Airways is in terms of service and delivery and all of that. There's just areas that are the Ethiopians are way ahead in, and then there's areas where Kenya's ahead in. I think for Kenya, you have the advantage of having an open commercial capital economy since independence.
Yeah.
Whereas we had a communist system between 1974 and 1991 that basically killed business, right? And we had a regime that basically discouraged owning a business, and the vast majority of the educated folks left.
Yeah, exactly.
To the diaspora.
The brain drain.
Exactly, a major brain drain. We're just trying to reverse that now. Right, encouraging a lot more people to come back and invest and get involved in business and so forth and so on. So, I mean, for me, it's a very interesting sort of scenario where I feel like with Kenya and in Ethiopia now engaging more so than ever in terms of business, right? On the security side, the two governments have always been eye to eye.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
On the political side, we've always seen eye to eye. It's weird, but Kenya and Ethiopia are the only two neighbors that have never lifted guns on each other. Think about it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Think about it. Since 1963, since Muse and Haile Selassie sat down and had that conversation.
It's always been very cordial, hasn't it? Actually, when you go back, you even see those pictures of Kenyatta and the President Kenyatta, the first. And
and Prime Minister Abiy and
so actually friends, they were close. Huh?
Yeah, and then the two leaders we have now are close friends. So we've always had that straight. All I say, I mean, Kenya is a BFF for us, and Ethiopia is your BFF because we always had each other's back. We have a security agreement, we have a political agreement, we have an immigration agreement. We just need to strengthen the business agreement. And I think Safaricom coming into Ethiopia is the first step in that. And when you have the biggest brand, the biggest company in East Africa and in Kenya, now established in Ethiopia, that should encourage more Kenyan firms to come in. And then there's a lot more Ethiopian brands now coming into Kenya. We have Tomoka Coffee. We have other brands that are present here that are now looking at expanding into the Kenyan market. Ethiopian restaurants are popping up everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
In Nairobi, people are used to eating Ethiopian food.
Oh, yeah. We love that injera and kitfo.
Exactly. Leather products, Ethiopian leather products are now made inroads. So I see a lot of, and the infrastructure now you can drive to Addis. Probably the next. I think the border
all the way
through. So you have a major highway now that's connected. You have Lamu Port and the railway that's being developed. So, I mean, the next 5 years, it's going to be great.
So, I'm just curious, because it feels to me like you're now starting to move, more into sort of that investor mindset, looking at the tech space very strategically. Kazana looks like, with everything that it does, there's going to be more things coming through. And I'm just curious, just to hear your perspective in terms of where do you see the group going in the next 2 to 5 years? In terms of your vision, what are the opportunities you think you can see happening in Ethiopia, beyond Ethiopia, and so forth?
For us, the first thing is first. I mean, we want to be able to create 50,000 jobs, direct jobs. And
That's
so
core to your mandate.
core to our mandate. That's our mandate. Like for us, it's not about the bottom line is great. You need to survive. We're not an NGO, so obviously we have to be able to make money and survive. But at the same time, our core strategy is to be able to be a conduit to create 50,000 jobs, right? And so we're very sort of particular in terms of the investments that we make to be a catalyst for more jobs.
Okay.
All right. So whether it's e-services, government services, fintech, I mean, these are the next generation of jobs that will be created in this part of the world, right? So we're looking at those spaces very particularly, mainly because they're catalysts for creating jobs.
And then there's a very strong sort of technology bias underpinning a lot of that, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you're looking at a country with 65% of the population, probably maybe 70% of the population is unbanked. Right, so there's a huge opportunity to bring those people on board, because if you have unbacked populations, and then you have people that out of the system, they'll always be poor. Unless you can bring people into the system, you can't expect them to move up the ladder, right? So for us, we're looking at that space, particularly the fintech space that I mentioned, particularly, and there's agriculture value chains and manufacturing sector to a limit, and then the services sector, mainly around hospitality. Because nothing creates jobs like tourism.
That's true.
And hospitality, which Kenya has done really, really well. And we're just beginning that journey now. And then the BPO sector, business process outsourcing, because we have a ton of young talent out there that could, be trained to provide services for clients outside. And if anything that COVID has taught us, you can be anywhere and do anything.
That's true. Right? So really harness that young population.
Exactly.
Massive young population.
So we have a huge population that's taking up tech and learning how to code and all of that. So getting them organized to be able to provide services for clients outside, I think those are some of the most interesting things we're looking at.
And then maybe you can give us a sense of where, some of the things you might have learned from, coming through your career into where we are with Kazana Group now. Are there any things that, you think would be interesting to share, maybe some highs and lows? I know one of the lows obviously sounds like, dealing with some of the bureaucracies you dealt with, years ago to get things done. Presumably that's changing. But what are some of the lessons learned, in the last few years, and also going back pre-Kazana? What are some of the things that you've picked up in your entrepreneurial journey?
One is persistent. I mean, nothing ever gets done unless you get up in the morning and have a focus to get it done. Number two is having a plan. It's like, you go to kindergarten and start grade 1, you have a plan to, you know exactly what you need to do to get to where you need to go. And it's the same thing with business, same thing with life, right? The third thing is never get discouraged, never have somebody else on your vision. Not your family, not your friends, not your girlfriend, nobody. It's your life, you only live it once, and live it the way you want to.
Live it well, live it fully. Man,
I have no regrets, not at all. Not for the bad stuff, not for the time I was so broke and hitting up friends for fun. I have no regrets, because those journeys are the ones that made me who I am today, right? And I'm always very open to sharing my experience, especially with young people that are just coming up.
Yeah.
Especially in a place, on the continent. I don't care where you go. We don't have a mentorship sort of culture. The big guys make it, and you hardly ever see them educating, the guys that are trying to make it on how they did it.
And showing the handles and stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think it's a common African problem, don't you think?
It's a major African problem.
I think, the guy who makes it almost feels protective of that secret sauce and doesn't want to spread it out.
Yeah.
And like I was reading the other day about something like the most important thing in life is to give without expectation, so that, whatever happens, there'll always be goodwill, there'll always be benefit. But you can't hold it all. You can't, as they say, boil the ocean,
Yeah.
So I love what you're saying there. So basically give the youth a chance, mentor them.
That's our future. I mean, in all honesty, we have a ton of youth that we've educated. I don't care what level of education, but they know how to read and write, and they've gotten somewhere. There's expectations from family, from themselves, from the community, from the village that they're to make it, right? And if the ones that sort of have gone through whatever they've gone through and made it somehow, are not able to look back and give a lending hand. And I'm not saying be an NGO, be a development. I don't believe in that stuff. I don't believe in development. I don't believe in the NGO sort of resources. Africa will never develop because of NGOs. If we did, Ethiopia would be the number one developed country in the world.
That's true.
You know what I mean? Because there have been NGOs in our country since 1980s. Since they came to, Save the Children has been around for 50 years. How long does it take to save the children?
Yeah.
Right? So, for me, it's... I think our government needs to step up, and we need to, keep pushing our governments to do what they need to do. But more so, we need to sort of also step up and push our corporate leaders, executive leaders, and the folks that are making money to also step back and give back.
And elevate these younger people as well.
They have to.
Absolutely, we have to help our own, otherwise...
Nobody's going to come help you.
Yeah.
You're looking at what's going on in Morocco right now with all the African migrants just being treated like cows on the ground, tied up, because they're trying to make it to Europe. I don't blame them, and I don't blame the Europeans for blocking them, because, what would we do if 1 million Europeans are all of a sudden coming to us? Think about the reverse. I'm blaming leadership on the continent. I'm not blaming those kids. I'm not blaming the European government at all.
And we must make our own way forward.
We have to. We have everything.
Great. Addis, thank you so much for joining us for the podcast today.
Thank you, Mo.
This is one of the fastest turnarounds I've ever had. I met you on Saturday. Today is Monday. We're in it. And I really do appreciate, and also sharing so openly these Ethiopian perspectives. But I'm so thrilled that, you have this Kenyan context and you're actually bringing stuff back this way too. So, I'm really glad to see that you're looking at, East Africa and Kenya and Ethiopia in such a positive way. But also more importantly that, you're seeing the opportunities ahead and how, both countries can benefit from each other.
Thank you. Thank you, man, for giving me the opportunity. It's always a pleasure. Like I said, man, I feel at home here. I feel at home back home. And I feel like the two of us together, oh, my God, unstoppable. We got to give these Nigerians a run for their money.
There we go, the Ogas.
Ogas are taking too much attention, too much of the money coming in for investment on the continent. So I think Ogas, if the Kenya and Ethiopia, start focusing on working together, I think we give them a run for their money.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And once again, we appreciate you being on the Pure Digital Passion podcast with Moses Kamibaro. And I want to wish you all the best for the rest of your trip here in Nairobi.
Thank you, Mo. Thank you very much.